Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Mythic. I'm your host, Spencer, and I am joined by my co-host, the cosplay queen of this podcast, Mythic Mikaela.
Hello, everyone. I like that I feel like I get a new title every podcast.
Yeah, that's the goal.
Okay.
That's the goal. I have to ask, are you doing a cosplay right now?
I am not, but I possibly might be starting one. And I was laying in bed last night. I had an idea for it. So, that's when things really start getting moving, when you're thinking about cosplay at 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah, exactly. It's like it's kind of like shower thoughts, where like the shower thoughts are more likely to turn into actions because you get, I don't know. There's just something about being in your bedroom in the shower when you're having those kind of thoughts that is, just really turns them into actionable items.
Yep.
We're not here to talk about what I'm sure is going to be an amazing cosplay for Mikaela. We are here to talk about Standard this week. Before we do that, don't forget to check out our sponsor over at... Oh, man. Were we even sponsored, by the way, last time you were on the show?
I believe we were.
Were we? Did we just get sponsored? I feel like... Oh, I guess we had two sponsors now.
Okay.
That's
okay.
fair. So, that's true. That's a good point. Man, it's been so long, Mikaela. So we have two sponsors. If you are looking for cards on MTGO, if you're trying to compete in those standard challenges, or even modern or legacy, or whatever you're trying to do over there, don't forget to check out puremtgo.com for a bunch of Magic Online content, as well as the entire Constructor Criticism Network. And their sponsor, MTGO Traders, is the best way to buy MTGO singles. It's funny too, Mikaela, because we all see on Twitter all those people complaining that they don't have, like, they use those rental services and they're just like, I can't get any of the cards I want to play. How are people playing? And it's like, they're playing by buying the cards.
Yeah.
And MTGO cards are, it's not like Arena. Like, you can take your money in and out of there, and MTGO Traders is, I don't know, have you used them, right, Mikaela? Where, like, you just put your order in, and then they just deliver it to you. It's not like, I mean, I don't know about you, but like back in the day on MTGO when you had to like hunt cards down in the trade section, and like you had no idea if you were getting the best price or not, it was the worst. And MTGO Traders fixes all that, and they are the sponsor of our sponsor, Pure MTGO. Our other sponsor is new, and they're Grey Viking Games. And for this podcast, it's great because this podcast is focused on Arena. And they are a website that sells Arena codes. So whether you need 6 packs of the new set when the new set drops, you can buy a pre-release code and get that. Or if you have, if you want custom codes for sleeves, deck, what are the I don't think it's pets. What are the avatars, things like that. There's tons of Arena codes on there, and they're really cheap. Like when they offered us the sponsorship, they sent everyone codes or like credit to do stuff, and I like just spent $5 additional, and I got like 32 packs or something. Like, it's really cheap, and it's just like the best way to kind of kickstart your collection too if you're getting back into Arena after quarantine as you prepare for paper events or stuff like that. You just go buy all the pre-release codes for sets you missed, and it's pretty amazing. And if you use the code Mythic10 at checkout, you'll get 10% off your order. So
Sounds like a pretty sweet deal.
It really is. It really is, Mikaela. You know what's a sweeter deal is the return of this show.
For sure. I've missed our Sunday morning chats about Magic.
You know what? Me too. It's funny because like we were supposed to podcast last week, and my life and your life are just so hectic. It's actually one of the reasons that I want to choose a co-host. Is like she'll get it. Like she'll get marriage, toddler, like she'll get all this. But I want to just thank the listeners. It's funny. I've had people reach out a couple times about like, hey, when are you going to start Magic content again? Like, I really loved your show with Mikaela. Is she going to come back when you start? I'm like, yeah. Like, yes. And you've been so understanding. I know you were busy too, so like, I don't want, but you just, like, I said this on the episode that you weren't on that I did when I was like, hey, can I do this bonus episode? But you like bought dinner for my family. Uh, you were really understanding when my wife was in the hospital. It's been a crazy year for everyone, but you just really cared, and I just want to say thank you on the podcast. I really appreciate it, Mikaela.
Yeah, you're welcome. The world's a better place when we can all understand that everyone has things going on, and sometimes we just need time, and we need to take breaks.
Yeah, it's funny because like the original reason for the break was I was moving, right? As people can see, I'm like in a new space, but it just kind of got extended. That's okay. It's funny too because like I've been doing my other podcast since I moved, and we've had to move that podcast like to a different day of recording like every week. I'm just like it's hard, but it really makes me impressed with people like Marshall Sutcliffe, who every week on the exact same day get their podcast out for, I think they hit 600 episodes last week or the week before. It's very impressive.
Yeah, I remember back when I was grinding GPs back in 2012, my now husband getting his fog signed by Marshall. So he's been doing this for a long time.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. There's a picture of me and Marshall because when I was on constructed criticism, people called me the Marshall of constructed, and like I'm short, Mikaela. I don't know if you know this. Like I'm like 5'8".
Still taller than me.
That's fair, but Marshall is tall. So there's a picture of us, and he's like way taller than me. It's really funny. With that being said, now that the show is back, we're going to be recording every Sunday. Podcast will come out probably on Wednesdays, unless there will be times where it comes out earlier, but it will always come out by Wednesday. But also that means we're looking for Mythic guests. So Mikaela and I kind of met about what we wanted the show to look like. We want to do an episode about what limited looks like, what historic looks like, and what standard looks like, as well as another episode that's either a guest episode or just if we have something we want to talk about in improving at Magic, helping players get Mythic, or inviting people on to talk about their Mythic runs or their events. So if you are wanting to join the show, talk about your Mythic run, share your experience, don't forget to tweet at us when you hit Mythic with your Mythic deck, and I will reach out. We had a bunch of guests lined up before the show took a break. To those same people, the invite still stands. Next time you hit Mythic, just DM us back, and we'll get you scheduled. With that being said, let's talk about standard.
Yeah.
Mikaela, so this standard format gets poo-pooed on a lot, and I want to talk about that kind of, before we get into the power rankings. Why do you think that is?
It feels, I think to a lot of people, it feels like we've been doing the same thing in standard for a while now, right? These Throne of Eldraine cards are, still dominating. You're still seeing these adventure packages. You're still seeing the Rogues deck pop up. Sultai's been doing Sultai things since last September. So in a sense, a lot of that hasn't changed with the new release of sets. However, everything feels very balanced. Like each week you are really thinking about what deck is going to be the best deck to take this week. And
yeah, I think.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna agree with you. I was gonna say that I think every deck but 2 of the 7 decks we're gonna talk about, there were 7 events, and I think 5 different decks won them or something. Like it is like you can win an event with a lot of different decks in standard.
Yeah, so it does feel like there's great balance there, but it does feel like a lot of repetitiveness. It does, we've kind of been doing the same thing for quite a while now, even after some bans and everything.
So, kind of really quick, before we dive into the decks that we're going to talk about, the format overall, I want to talk about how power rankings work because it's been a while. So, this is something that that when I was on constructor criticism we did for a long time, and then when Allie and Mason took over, they kind of were going to sunset this. And I was like, I think this is really valuable for arena players to understand what the winner's metagame actually looks like. And when we started doing it on Constructorism, it was actually based off of an article by Frank Karsten about how to rank decks and like how to attribute value to finishes in Magic, because it can be hard in a game with a lot of variance to understand, like, well, how much more is winning an event worth than just top 8ing an event? How much more is a top 8 worth than a top 16? And it can be hard to understand that, because there can be decks in the top 16 in large events like an SEG, a Pro Tour, a GP that have the exact same record as the decks in top 8. And so what we do, the way that we give points, and this one I only did top 16s because these events are really small. When SEGs and GPs come back, and or large scale arena events that have if we had done it last month, the Pro Tour would have been included and stuff like that, and we would have done a way to do that. But basically, you get 6 points for first, 5 points for second, 4 for top 4, 3 for top 8, 2 for top 16, and then in large events we give 1 for top 32. And you're like, all of these are only 1 point off, and it's like, yeah, because the records are not that different. Like, they're really not. And it weights, it gives obviously extra points for top 8ing. It gives obviously extra points for being in that winner's metagame. And I think that this event, this power rankings, was surprising for me. And if I had not added all of June, so if I had just done the last, I think 2 or 4 challenges, these rankings would have been different. But we're including, I think there have been 6 challenges in June and the 5K from Insight Esports, and those are the events included. So, Mikaela, are you ready to talk about standard?
Oh, so ready.
Okay. Let's move over to our first deck of an honorable mention. I don't know how much time we'll give these 2 honorable mentions, but the first deck that we have is mono white. And here's the thing, Mikaela. This was like my deck a few months ago. Like, this is the thing that I played like the most of. And the list that we have on screen, I think this took second at the 5K and here's the thing. Mono white is in a really interesting place. And the reason that I think it's in such an interesting place right now is that you have Elite's Spellbinder, and you have the Magistrate, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
lock some cards out of your opponents.
You know what? I mean, we'll get into this in a little bit, but like I got Mythic this month with Naya playing these 2 cards. These 2 cards in some combination. The combination is really powerful, and so games where that's working, that's really good. The other thing is, I really love the inclusion of Legion Angel in this list. I've been playing that in my mono white decks. I think that some number of Legion Angels is really powerful. It really lets you take to the skies in specific matchups that once you have things locked up. Obviously the Lurrus is out of the board, or I guess this one only has 1 Lurrus out of the board. Gives you the option to be grindier. You've got Elspeth, you've got more. There's a lot of really powerful cards in mono white. Here's why I believe this is like. By the way, this is the last deck to have double-digit points, coming in with 15 points. No other deck in all of the decks got double-digit points. That's why it's one of our honorable mentions. I think this deck is not very good right now, and I say that as somebody who has played a lot of it. I think that back a while ago, I really thought this deck had a good Sultai matchup, and honestly, I would think that that combo, right, that Magistrate plus Spellbinder combo would help that matchup even more. Like, it would just be a slam dunk. I have been losing that matchup pretty regularly, and I think that without Maw of the Skyclave, you have a really hard time putting pressure on the Sultai deck. And because of that, I just kind of wonder if that's not what you're trying to do, because this is obviously the best finishing aggro deck, right? Like, so it makes me wonder if you need to lean more into the aggro side of this and less on like the cute stuff. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think what gives us an advantage as an aggro deck is it kind of gets around the Love Struck Beast issue that maybe a deck like Mono Red would struggle against. But yeah, so where Sultai is supposed to be a good matchup, you're still weak to Sultai's Wraths. Not a ton of ways to get card advantage, get back in the game, refill your hand, other than Legion's Angel. I think that Faceless Havens are very nice to have in the deck and can help close, but I've not played against this deck a whole lot. I've not played this deck a whole lot. It makes sense that it's like the reigning aggro deck at the time, but it's
I agree with you. Like, there's not a lot of ways to the version that I'm playing now, by the way. Like, I've adjusted this deck a lot. Like I said, I've played this quite a bit. Like, I've been playing more. Like, I have 2 Luruses in the sideboard for matchups where you kind of need to grind people out, and then I actually put back in 3 Maws and 2 of the 4-drop. The one that turns is either a sword on one end or what is his name? He's a 4/4 that you can move equipment around or enchantments, and then on the other side he's a 2 mana equipment that you can equip for 2. That when the creature dies, return it to your hand. And then
I'm not remembering this off the
Oh
top of my
man,
head.
it's a legendary creature. He's really good. We actually, our last episode before our break, we had John Baker on. He's actually one of our patrons, so shout out to John. But I've been playing kind of the exact problem that you just described. I've been trying to fix, like, close out games more, less main deck giant killers, less of the package, the Spellbinder package, and that's been really effective in fixing a lot of the problems. As well as, I think that I also am playing 1 Sentinel's Eyes too. But yeah, I think that there is room for this deck to grow quite a bit. But let's move off of this honorable mention.
I will mention Helvar, God of Battle.
Is that his name?
Yes, and Sword of the Realms.
Sword of the Realms. There we go.
Yep, from Kaldheim. So all these sets have like at least a third more card names to remember.
Right. Coming in at number 2, or not number 2. Coming in as our second honorable mention, we have Nine Adventures. This is the deck that I just got Mythic with. The list on our screen, I believe, is let me click it really quick. I think it's Jabberwocky's first place list. Mm-hmm. This deck's really good. I know you've played a lot of this deck also, so I'll kind of let you kind of kick off. Like, what is this deck trying to do? What does this deck's matchups look like? Why is this deck 1 point for making our top 5? It comes in with 22 points, by the way.
I feel like this is a top 5 deck. I think there are some decks out there that aren't very good that have targeted this deck a little bit, because this deck does a lot of powerful things. You have draws that can be very aggressive when need be against decks like Sultai, but you can also, you're not, if you don't get that draw that's just super explosive, you can also still kind of grind out the match with cards like Showdown of the Skalds and getting value off that Edgewall Innkeeper. And if you have an empty hand with this deck, it's kind of weird. Like, the game's not been going very well for you if that's how it's going. But it also has this Drannith Magistrate Elite Spellbinder combo, where you can somewhat lock your opponent out of spells.
It's like really powerful in this deck. Like, in the mono white deck, I kind of was like, it's kind of clunky, and the 1/3 is kind of small for your creatures. But in this deck, it's actually insane. Like, you play it, and then you just start spellbindering them, and you just take their wrath, or you take their important ramp spell, or whatever. It really disrupts your opponent against, or their counter spell for your showdown, right? It's way better in this deck. Like, go ahead.
Oh yeah, for sure. the thing is, every creature in this deck is a threat. You know, Edgewall Innkeeper is getting you card advantage. Your opponent has to deal with it. Clarion Spirit can just make your board gigantic very fast. The Jaspera Sentinel, like, not like super scary on its own, but can really make for
it pushes, right? Like, you know, having this 1 mana, it makes it really easy to double spell early. Like, some of your best hands involve, you know, turn 1 Sentinel, turn 2 either, you know, front half of Lovestruck Beast or Edgewall Innkeeper, and then, you know, another spell. Like, the dream is obviously, my favorite is Edgewall Innkeeper into Giant Killer, because I'm, like, you know, addicted to value. But the other thing about Giant Killer is tapping down creatures in this deck is the best I've ever seen for Giant Killer. Because it lets you get your small, derpy creatures in real easily.
Oh, and your small derpy creatures don't have to stay small derpy creatures for long.
They don't stay small derpy creatures for long. The number of times where, like, I had a 7/7 spirit token the other day, and I was like, this is over for my opponent.
That's beautiful. Okay, for all the listeners out there, if you have not cast Showdown of the Skalds, you need to do it at least once. It is an experience.
Yeah, this deck is a great time. I think that I think that it's interesting because I was texting my friends as I was making my Mythic run this month, and I was like, I have no idea what this deck's bad matchups are. Like, I literally, I think I had lost 2 matches to Diamond, and then, like, lost 3 in a row to Sultai, and then switched to, like, Historic for a little while, and then switched back and didn't lose another match. And while I think that Sultai on paper is supposed to be a bad matchup, the thing that this deck does really well is between Showdown of the Skalds, the Adventure package, and honestly, weirdly enough, Clarion Spirit, you just have a game in, like, any game you play.
Yeah, I think your Sultai lists are really going to come down to how they're built for how this matchup plays out. I think you can build a Sultai list to be a little bit stronger versus this deck, but this deck's still going to have game. I know there was a Dimir control deck running around that this deck is not very good against, which can be, you know, problematic. But however, that Dimir control deck is not very good against the overall meta, so maybe not something to really worry about.
There were 0 Dimir control decks that got points for this, by the way, for what it's worth.
Okay, good to know. I know it did exist. Like, it was
actually I remember
a really large
it.
part of the meta for a tournament. And then in VML a couple weeks ago, I played against Blue-White, and in testing, that matchup felt awful.
Yeah, I think that if it's funny because I played against a lot of Jeskai control with this deck, and that matchup's really good. But I think one of my 2 losses that I mentioned off the beginning was Blue-White. It's actually really hard to beat Archon. The Archon that makes 2/2s,
yes.
The enchantment one. That card is freaking. It doesn't die to Giant Killer and then makes 2/2s for free, and you're like, oh, this is a problem.
You're like boarding in Red Cat melees and playing a Cronin.
It's not.
Like, kind of get around that.
Yeah, that card's a bad matchup.
Yeah, it's you know, so I think that's something to, like, think about going forward for sideboards is, yeah, if this card's gonna see a tick up in play, then maybe we have to consider it. But yeah, it feels bad when you're like elite spellbindering their Archon.
Yeah, you have to. You just freaking lose if you don't. Yeah, Blue-White was one of the ones that was like, this is a bad matchup. Next up we have Rogues, and I'm well known for my disdain for Rogues in Standard, but my love for Rogues in Historic. So I'll go first on this one. I think this deck does not have a place in the current metagame, and is probably not very good, but I always think that. And there is a reason that I think that. I think that specifically this deck does a really good job of tricking you into believing that you get a lot of free wins between Runecrab and Thieves Guild. But the problem is that, like, your stuff, right? Like the thing that makes up your deck is like it's just too hard to mill people fast enough in this format. Everybody's going under you. So if we I'm just gonna spoiler alert this entire power rankings really quick. Mono White and Night Adventures already go under you, right? You've already got Edgewall Innkeeper. Mono White crushes, destroys this deck. And they don't even have Sentinel Eye's main deck anymore. That's how bad a 3-1 that can discard a card to be indestructible is against you. Half of the decks in these top 7 decks can just play Arachnid, all of these decks can play Arachnid or Ox, other than Mono White, and not to mention that most of these decks are green and can just play Scavenging Ooze. It's just so easy to hate out this deck that I think you get a lot of. This deck is really good when people aren't prepared for it. So it making top 5 this week or this month maybe doesn't surprise me, because I think that we're seeing a lot less Scavenging Ooze. We're seeing people skimming on their Oxes and their Spiders or their Phoenixes, depending on what deck you're playing. But the second this deck does well, it just can't do well again, because it doesn't have the resiliency of something like Dredge in Modern that had, right? I don't know, what are your thoughts? I'm obviously a hater, so. Oh, I should also switch so that people can see the deck on
you want these types of decks in Standard, though, right? Where if people aren't respecting it, then it can kind of sneak in, and it's going to keep the format fresh. It's going to keep it's going to keep people invested every week in what do I want to play this week and how do I want to build this deck, rather than just Just Guy Luke is awesome. I'm going to register this again this week.
It's funny. It's funny because I do actually feel that way pretty often about certain decks. I like decks that put pressure on the format, but I think the problem with this deck specifically is that the only pressure it puts on me is a sideboard tax, and I don't know if I like sideboard taxes in Standard. I don't mind them in Modern, because I think the Modern's card pool is so open that you find ways to hit multiple sideboard taxes at once. But I don't think that's true in Standard. The Spider is, and the Ox, for what it's worth, I don't think any of those cards literally go in any other matchups. And I think that's a little frustrating.
Yeah, I think another thing to consider with this deck too is the technical skill involved with the deck to really play it extremely well, I think, is a lot higher than other decks.
That's what most people love about it. They really feel like their play skill, they get to leverage their play skill with this deck a lot. So,
I think that's important to remember with this deck too.
One of this deck's benefits, though, because I'm a known poo-pooer on rogues, though, is actually that this deck does get to play Castle Lochtwain, and I think there are only 2 decks in Standard. And I was going to mention this when we were talking about Mono White, that Rakdos and Mono Red each only got 6 points, so even combined didn't do as well as Mono White. But I think Rakdos might be the only other deck that plays Castle Lochtwain in Standard right now, and that card is busted. That card is so good.
I mean, when you're playing rogues, you want to have a handful of cards. Part of being the rogues player is you can have anything.
Yeah. I do think that, this deck keeps getting tuned. I think that, Cling to Dust is a great card in Standard. That card is, this deck getting to play that pretty freely as a one-of is pretty great. It's got a lot going for it. I will say that I think Drown in the Loch is tied for top 5 of my least favorite Magic cards of all time. I think that it's funny too, because the card it competes with is the Green-White Command. What is that? Command.
I read it the other day.
Yeah, that card. Yeah, I don't like cards that are that efficient that completely blow out the game and only are playing like I don't know. It's really weird to me.
Okay. Yeah, have you not enjoyed the moment that you just like know your opponent has a drown in the lock and you know exactly how to play it around perfectly?
No.
Or that moment that you get totally punished when you know you should have played around the drown in the lock.
That's the thing. I like the pressure. I do like the pressure this deck puts on the format. Like, I just don't know that I will ever play it for a standard event unless I'm like, oh yeah, there's been 0 spiders or oxes for. It's like kind of like Dredge in that way, but it's a more fun deck for me because it's funny. I obviously need to shut up about the deck because like people are just gonna think that I think it's bad. I don't think it's bad. I just wouldn't play it.
Well, someone's gonna be playing it every week.
That's true. That's true.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. I have to go back to Drown in the Lock though, because I enjoy the emotional swing of that card.
All right, talk to me about it.
Yeah, you just got me on this thought about, I've had these games where I could have 100% played around the Drown in the Lock, and then I just didn't, or I cycled a card, or I cast a card that I didn't need to cast when I could have just resolved my spell for free the next turn by playing around it, and those are like real low moments. But then the moment that your opponent has it and you can play your spell that's going to get around it, it feels great. So that's kind of my spiel on that card. I think it's a really, really interesting card to play against that I find a lot less frustration.
I actually think this is an interesting topic that we can dive into a little bit because I think this will help people understand my perspective on the deck a little bit, which is that while you get to leverage your skill with the deck, you also get to leverage your skill against the deck quite a bit. And like understanding, you talked about, playing spells that Drown in the Lock doesn't hit right now. That's really important. Also, playing the correct spells into a Drown in the Lock. Like, okay, I should not play my Shadow of the Skulls right now because they have Drown in the Lock up. I'm going to play a spell that they have to Drown in the Lock that they can't just play a flash creature against. So that next turn, even if they Drown in the Lock this, and then next turn they'll have to play their rogue, but I'll pull ahead this way. It does create that kind of like a scale, a balancing scale on how you have to play against the deck. And I get it. I get that that's fun for people.
Look, I'm the person who loves my limited games going to decking, so it makes sense that I'd like to play against this deck.
By the way, we didn't mention it. Rogues did come in with 22 points, and I think I said 22 for Naya because I thought this deck had 23, but it was 21 for Naya, 22 for this. Coming in next, we have the deck deemed Sultai Control. I like that this deck is called Control because I think that most ramp decks are actually control decks, but this is a ramp deck. Like straight up. Mikaela, you would think I don't know how well you know me as far as like my Magic type of decks. Also, can we just talk about this deck has Pelucranos Unchained main now? Like, just
I don't know how I feel about that.
I love it. It's funny because like when Lotus Cobra was first spoiled, like Lotus Cobra is my favorite Magic card of all time. I had a lot of Pelucranos Lotus Cobra decks, brewed up, and Pelucranos does this, like, puts pressure on the battlefield in a really interesting way, where in certain matchups you just kill your opponent, in other matchups like you just get to take over the game with it. But I want to talk about, a lot of people still say this is the best deck in Standard. It's coming in way below that. It's coming in at number 4 with 32 points. And I think that people have given up on trying to understand the Standard metagame and just assume that because this deck sees a lot of play that it's still the best deck. And it's still a good deck. But I think this deck has a lot of decks that are able to attack it. I mentioned that I had a really positive win percentage with Naya against it, even though on paper people are saying, no, Naya should just lose. I think that Mono White on paper beats this. I think that Rogues, depending on the draw and the way that you build your deck, can beat this. There's a lot of decks that are able to attack this deck. But that being said, it still puts up results.
Yeah. I find it interesting. I don't think every single Sultai deck recently has been playing the Emergent Ultimatum package.
No, so there's two things. So there was the Titan's Nest Sultai deck. I played that deck quite a bit. I do not think that deck is very good. But if you kind of look at, like, I think the list that we have on screen was third place in the 5K. Like, the ones that I pulled up that were winning were mostly Yorion Ultimatum decks.
Yeah. So again, being a Yorion deck, you're losing some consistency, right? So these decks definitely just like seem like the Sultai list seems like a big pile of cards where things can go wrong. And
Yeah,
especially if you're running into more aggressive things, if you're running into a rogues, I
mean, yeah, you obviously have lucrative domain, but your deck's also 80 cards, so it's like have they already taken over to the game to the point where that doesn't matter at that point?
Yeah, another tons of decks are main deck Mystical Dispute, which kind of makes it hard to do what you're trying to do as fast as you want to do it.
Yeah, I think this deck has fallen off quite a bit. Obviously, the reason that a deck like this, I think the reason that these have become the most successful Yorion decks for what it's worth, when, we obviously talked about blue-black and blue-white earlier, right? These other Yorion decks that have potential. The thing is like, Binding of the Old Gods and Cultivate, I think outside of Emergent Ultimatum, are your only 4-ofs. Like, it is very clear that you are trying to specifically be like, pull ahead on mana, slow the game down while you do that, right? With other stuff. But it's funny because I feel like these decks before were playing like 3 Shadow's Verdict, 2 Extinction Events, and they're way down on sweepers.
Yeah.
Which I think is why so many of the aggressive decks can continue to prey on this.
Yeah, and being down on the sweepers makes it interested to see where like a Toski Naya deck goes, or any of the adventure decks. I think that leaves some opening for those against these Sultai decks. Not that I think those matchups were fairly close before.
By the way, Jabberwocky's list that we have on screen had 0 Toskis.
Yes, I am aware of that.
I was like, this. I literally went up on Toskis during my Mythic run. I was playing one, and I was like, I need more of this. Like, so.
I had taken that list for VML and then adjusted a few things in it, and Toski was one addition.
Yeah, that's fair. I do think that, while we're talking about how people are prepared for a Sultai and ready to attack it, it's still, I mean, it is really consistent for an 80 card deck.
Yeah.
It was funny. I don't remember if it was a podcast or an article where I read, but they talked about how Yorion was helping people build their decks better, like understanding how to build an overall strategy even when you're including 80 cards. Like, it was challenging people to figure out, like, okay, how many removal spells do I need? How many ram spells do I need? How many... And that's a good thing. Like, that is helping people become better deck builders that will continue even after Yorion is gone.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think that if you've tuned your Sultai list, you probably actually have a pretty good understanding of how your deck is supposed to function and what you're trying to do. We didn't mention this with the Naya deck, but like Naya, for example, has a really bad mana, like really, really bad mana, and the Sultai decks have really, really good mana. And because of that, they don't mulligan. Like, you would think, like, oh, it's an 80 card deck, like you're gonna mulligan a lot more. And I actually don't think that's true. I think this deck has one of the best mana packages. You've got Cultivate, you've got Binding of the Old Gods. Depending on the list, you've got a bunch of Wolf Willow Havens and Omen of the Seas, and like, you have a lot of things that are going to smooth out your draws and let you continue to kind of just make the game work out.
Yeah, and I think a card like Omen of the Sea is great to adjust yourself early game for whatever matchup you're up against.
Anything else on this deck before we move on?
No, I haven't really played a whole bunch of it, so.
That's fair. This is a deck that I've really enjoyed, but I have not been playing it because I've been playing so much Naya. All right, next up. Oh, go ahead.
I guess the payoff for this deck is you could do some really extremely cool, powerful things.
Oh, you really do.
When everything goes right.
So. It's a really good and fun deck, and it's funny that people don't like the format because of it, because I think that it's like, this is the kind of deck I want in Standard. Like, it pressures the mid-range decks to be more aggressive, which I like. I like it when the mid-range decks have to be more aggressive. I like when the best deck is beaten by aggressive decks, because it gives legs up to newer players that are trying to understand combat, or players that really enjoy that. I don't know. I think that it's good when decks like that are the best, as long as they're not too good. Next up, I combined two decks that are really similar for this next one, which is Teamer. Okay. And I want to call that out before we start. So there are two versions of Teamer. There's the Luca version that puts a giant sea serpent into play. And there is the non-Luca version that plays a Garrick and more chariots and just Spari Sentinel. But they're all these like Teamer adventure decks that just kind of decide how they want to finish the game and how they want to close it out. The version that had more finishes was the Luca version, though. So that is the version that we have on screen. I've played against this deck a whole bunch the last few weeks, but have yet to play it yet. Mikaela, have you played with or against this yet?
I've not played the Luca version. I was pretty much on the old Teamer Adventures list for way entirely too long.
The turns version?
Yes.
So
yes.
Fun fact, there were 0 turns versions of this deck in these power rankings. No, not a single Teamer deck that got points was playing whatever the adventure card is.
Yeah, I guess I don't find that super surprising. I think just you're not really doing the turns thing better than Sultai is. So you might as well make something that can be a little bit more aggressive, or put something a little bit more powerful into play. Or get around a Wrath.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I really like about the changes to these decks, like I think the version that we have on screen has 2 Disdainful Stroke, 2 Negates main deck. That's powerful in this format. Yeah. Like that, Disdainful Stroke specifically is a card where there's just so many good hits right now. I love it. I love it when spells like this can see main deck play. And it's funny because when this card was spoiled, people were like, really excited this card's going to see a ton of play. It saw 0 play in the main deck until I think like this month. Like nobody was playing main deck Disdainful Stroke, and all of a sudden it was in tons and tons of lists as we look through June. And it's because the format has evolved into a place where you either go really far under people or you go really far over the top of people. And this deck, this Teamer deck, whether it's the Luca version or the non-Luca version, is able to kind of be that mid-range deck. Brazen Borrower, the Brazen Borrower, Bone Crusher, Lovestruck Beast, Edgewall and Keeper package has obviously been a reason that people are sick of Standard. They're just kind of sick of this deck specifically. Like I think if we're being honest, Teamer Adventures has been good for too long, and people are sick of it. And you know what? I am obviously a huge lover of Teamer. I think everybody knows that. But like this deck is sick. This deck is sweet.
It's fun to play. There's tons of decisions to be made. Yeah, I love it. Back to the Disdainful Stroke negate.
Oh yeah, go.
Normally those are cards like you don't want against a deck like mono red, right? But both of those still have game, even if you run into a mono red matchup. Like countering a Torbrand or Embercleave is relevant.
Yeah, I think those two cards specifically are cards that beat you. So and negate has always sometimes like I don't think anybody's ever been embarrassed to have a negate against like most mono red decks. But the fact that the mono red decks of today in standard specifically have 2 cards that are their best cards against you that disable stroke hits is pretty great.
Yeah, for sure. You know. Now if we could just solve Annex with the same thing.
Yeah, I know that card's unreal.
I love how we're complaining about mono red like we're not playing Love Struck Beast.
I know, right? It's I gotta ask, like, this will be the deck that I'm gonna play for like probably the next couple weeks because it's teamer, it's got it draws a bunch of cards, but also like Chariot, a Crone War main, like this deck is the hotness. This deck also won I think this deck won 2 events or something. Like this deck clearly is putting in the work. People are improving it. The mana looks a lot better than the Naya deck. It really helps to have a tri-land. Can we just say that? Like,
Chariot's a great card. Like,
oh, Chariot's the sweetness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree.
I love those cards that get around the Wrath abilities.
I also think that one of the things that this deck, both versions of this deck do really well, is the sideboards for these teamer decks. Like, I don't know how you felt about the Naya sideboard, but I had a lot of really good cards, but a lot of them were just cards that were in my main deck, and I was kind of switching my strategy according to my opponent. Whereas, like, in these teamer decks, I'm like, Cinderclasm, Red Cat Melee, Scavenging Use, more Mystical Dispute, Elder, Gargaroth, Ox. Like, these are just cards that just dumpster your opponent. And
yeah.
like, just you bring them in, and your opponent's like, I'm gonna lose to that.
Yeah, as if Love Struck Beast wasn't enough, add those 2 Elder Gargaroths.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, definitely some cards that just kind of, really, really can stop some other strategies quite easily.
Do you have an opinion on the Luca version versus the Jaspari Sentinel version?
The Luca version I don't know that I'm like very comfortable with it in a Prismari world right now. Right? Like, you're not, I guess you could cast on turn 4 technically. I don't know how often that's happening. But
yeah, you only have, most of them are only playing those 2 Llanowar Visionaries, so it's not happening very often.
But yeah, I think Prismari's been a pretty popular deck, and I don't know that Luca is that great against it because either A, they have the counterspell, or B, I imagine they're going to have some way to interact with that ability. And I just makes me a little nervous. I think probably kill Luca on the backswing after that. So
yeah, it's funny, right? Because I think most of the Sentinel versions are playing some number of their own Goldspan Dragons. They're, it's just a more lean deck, whereas the Luca deck is like kind of this mid-range value deck, and it's kind of about like where do you think the format sits to kind of decide where to go from here. This deck did come in with 34 points, so only 2 points more than Sultai, but it was a surprise for me that this deck came in so high because I think it's still relatively new.
Yeah.
All right, next up, speak of the devil and the devil shall appear. Mikaela, what are you doing to us? Now, in second place at 39 points, we do have Prismari. And Mikaela, I gotta ask, the first we gotta give some credit where credit's due for what it's worth. That I believe the very first version of this deck ever posted, was actually on Card Kingdom by Mason Clark from Constructive Criticism on our network.
Okay.
The very first the Prismari Dragons deck was just snow dragons before the Prismari Dragon was ever spoiled. So credit to Mason for seeing the potential here. I'm gonna be honest.
But do we really want to be giving credit to Mason?
That's
right
fair.
now?
That's fair. Actually, that's a great point. I want to say this though. I have never lost to this deck.
I wish I was you.
I think this deck is so good. Like 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 I actually think this is probably the best deck in standard. I've never lost to it. and I'm not sure why. It's funny because I think that like Saw It Coming is at its best in this deck and is like a really good card. You get to play main deck dispute pretty happily. You get to play Frostbite in your mid range deck that like plays Snowlands, right? You get to play face like this deck on paper is really really good.
Yeah, Expressive Iteration.
Oh yeah, I mean
Card's
sick.
Yeah.
So talk to me about this card because I think that people read this card and think it's a cantrip. It's not a cantrip.
It is just like it's so okay because so typically what I see happen a majority of the time with Expressive Iteration is you cast it on turn 3. Usually you have a pretty good opening to cast it on turn 3. Okay, you're finding a card that you want in your hand. You are exiling a land to make sure you hit your land drop a lot of times. There's gonna be situations where like that's not the situation, right? But and then yeah, your third card's just going away. You weren't that interested in it. But it's just this getting to see 3 cards and pretty much playing one right away and filling your hand with another one is just absurd.
2 mana 2-for-1s are good, is what you're saying?
Yeah. So
it's funny, right? Because I think this
spiral. It's growth spiral.
It really is. I think that one of the reasons that Jeskai Control sees so much. Actually, I think this card is a trap for what it's worth in like the control decks because I think Jeskai Control is just worse than Blue-White Control. Mm-hmm. But like this card in this deck is just you're able to really leverage the fact that you've got a lot of cheap cards. You've got, if you top deck this card in this deck, you're like really happy. Like
I lost my VML match. This, like,
go off, Queen. Go off, Queen.
Over it. Nah, my opponent, in effect, played extremely well, but like she I had to go for it. She had the double counter spell, but then she had no cards in hand. I'm like, okay, well, I can win the next turn. And she draws Expressive Iteration. She cast it, and then just like
it goes off, hits it. Yeah.
Like, oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, it could have been a land. It had to be Expressive Iteration.
I think that the thing is like you don't expect your Izzet or Prismari deck to have so many 2-for-1s, quote unquote. But like Bone Crusher Giant, Brazen Bar, Expressive Iteration. Maze Mind Tome, like they're all these value engines that I don't know, you don't expect. And then obviously like Magnum Opus is really interesting to me in this deck. I think that the list that we have on screen is playing a Magnum Opus over the third Prismari Dragon. And I really like that inclusion. This was the only list I saw that had that. I don't know if that came from somewhere, if this person's list. So shout out to Karate Dom. Yeah. Karate Dom. But I really loved this list specifically. And once again, you have the ability to play Ox out of the board. Not that I think Rogues is a bad matchup for this deck at all. I think this deck is a pretty lean deck that's able to kind of take advantage. But this deck just plays some of those powerful cards, right? Like we already mentioned Faithless Haven. We already mentioned Brazen Borrower. The deck is lean. This is a deck that I expect, even when Bone Crusher Giant and Brazen Borrower are gone, to find a way to continue to exist. I think that's how good Expressive Iteration and the Dragons are, and the supporting cast around it is just something that we have to figure out.
Yeah, I think the Foretell is very powerful in this deck. Is it Elrond's Epiphany, or are they just going to counter?
I know, right? It's so you have to guess. It's true. It's so true.
So a couple other interesting things about this deck is first the Gelazeth Prismari. The interaction with that and having a Maze Mind Tome in play and just being able to represent that counterspell mana for a player like me, that's probably way entirely too conservative when I think my opponent has a counterspell. Like that's terrifying. just that interaction, that almost just like surprise mana, right? Because I've definitely had it where it's like, oh, if they tap out to play this, I'm going to be totally fine, and then it's like, oh no, they could just have negate, or that could be a Sot coming in the Foretell Zone, and they have the mana for it now because they have this Maze My Tome and treasure token. So I still have to think about that. And then Goldspan Dragon is just, this card is just going to be causing me nightmares for the next year and a half.
I love this card so much. I'm so glad it's in Standard. I think that Standard is better when there's a 5-mana haste dragon that's playable. I think that it pressures the format in a lot of interesting ways where, like, red mid-range decks become playable because of it. Whether it's Thunder Mahalkite, what's the one that dealt 4 damage? Glorybringer, or...
Look, I also have, like, nightmares about Thunder Mahalkite, too, so...
Somebody played too many Lingering Souls.
Look, just spare me of your 5-mana dragons, please.
No, all of them. Bring on the 5-mana dragons. Come on. The other one that I really loved was Sarkhan, the 5-mana Sarkhan that turned into a dragon. Yeah, that one was really good. All of them.
There was another one fairly recently too. That was played in Gruul, maybe.
Yeah,
during like War of the Spark Standard.
That was the Sarkhan, right?
Was it the Sarkhan? I thought there was another one.
Yeah, I don't know. I won a lot of events with Gruul and Standard, so I'm sure that if anybody should be embarrassed for not remembering if there was another dragon, it's...
Was there a Riot Dragon that was played? I don't remember.
That dragon did not see play.
That didn't see play?
I mean, it saw a little bit of play. That card saw a little bit of play. I think that Sarkhan mostly overtook it for Standard, though. There was a Riot Dragon that saw a little bit of play in that deck. I think I played a 2-1 split at an Invitational that I won. That deck was sweet.
Or what was the one that pinged stuff? Like, you could pay the mana to ping stuff.
That was the Riot Dragon. You could pay mana on... You could, like, pay 3 mana to deal damage according to the counters on it or something.
I thought it was if it had a counter on it, you could deal
damage
to 2 creatures.
That may be what it was.
I don't know. I played more of this card than you did, clearly.
I was too busy playing Sarkhan. Come on.
Okay, fine. Sarkhan's pretty cool, but...
Anyway, we agree that 5-mana dragons are sweet. I think that this deck is sweet. I think that... I hope that as the format... we're getting closer to rotation, but I hope that this deck kind of sticks around.
I'm just going to be scarred enough that I'm playing 4 Disdainful Strokes.
The last deck on our list is Jeskai Cycling. And also, this deck comes in with... Alright, I tweeted this, so I have to say, I am shocked. I am shocked. This deck comes in with 47 points. Prismari came in with 39. There's not a world in which I would have thought... I combined Jeskai Cycling with 4-color cycling because there's not really a 4-color cycling, but I'm shocked. Obviously, you play this for VML. I think that... I don't know. How in the world did this deck end up at number 1 other than it cost $0 on Moto?
I think it's a lot of things, right? Number 1, I think it's been a deck that's been off of people's radar for long enough that, it can kind of slide right in. If those Soul Guide Lanterns aren't in the sideboard, it's a little bit easier to, get lethal with your Zenith Flare. Also, the deck can just attack in a lot of different ways, and it can deal with aggro decks. Like, if you have to get aggressive with the Zenith Flare, so you can gain life and keep yourself alive quickly enough. The Ironcrag Pyromancer is actually really huge against like decks like Mono Red and stuff. You can just take over the game. Flourishing Fox. If you can like stick a turn 1 Flourishing Fox and not have it die, that card gets out of control fast. Which doesn't always happen, but when it does, it's a card that has to be respected. So when you're seeing cards that aren't, respecting the graveyard, or when you're seeing decks that aren't respecting the graveyard like they should against a deck like this, or maybe aren't respecting the different ways that this deck can attack, either with just like getting super aggressive with the Flourishing Fox early on, or being able to, whittle down damage with the Dread Stinger, or just even create a giant board with a Valiant Rescuer. That adds up quick. And same Improbable Alliance. Those 1/1 flyers do a lot of work against a lot of decks. So a lot of things. We're not seeing a lot of Cinderclasms right now. We're not seeing a lot of Soul Guide Lanterns right now. So just
also only one Scavenge use was on screen so far. And there was a one of Scavenge use in the teamer sideboard, and I think 0 other Scavenging use in the in the deck list we've shown.
Yeah, and that's another relevant card. A lot of the more of pick a card off at a graveyard, out of graveyard at a time, like Clothies and stuff, can really impact the matchup, but not quite to the same extent as my opponent has had a Soul Guide Lantern in play, and I have to sit there and try to get around this.
I think that Soul Guide Lantern is a great one where we saw a couple of them as I was looking through these deck lists. The other thing is this deck puts a pressure on the format that's really interesting. When this deck very first came out, right? The threats were Flourishing Phlox, the Stinger and the Berserker. And that was it. That was just depending on how they kept their hand, that was what you had to worry about. And now they kind of get a value you out with Pyromancer and Improbable Alliance.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I don't know, a few months ago my friend texted me and was like, I think this is the best deck in Standard. And I was like, I think it's really good, and it's going to be a really good week 1 to 3 deck, but it's going to fall off the second people respect it. And then, as you said, people just aren't respecting it anymore, and it dominated June. I'm not going to pretend that it didn't. It's obviously not that I think Standard's pretty. I mean, as we can kind of now that the whole list is revealed, we have 47 for Cycling, 39 for Prismari, 34 for Teamer, 32 for Sultai. Then we have a drop off on Rogues, and then Naya, and then another drop off for Mono White. But all of these decks outside of Mono White are pretty close to each other in total number of finishes, except Cycling just crushed Magic Online, just destroyed it. And I think something that is true, there's this truth to people playing aggro decks for online events, that this Cycling deck does a really weird job of beating. You would not think that a deck that half of its cards are you're just paying mana to replace them would be good against aggro. But the thing is your creature package, just those 16 creatures, I'm pretty happy to trade a Stinger for any creature. Yeah, I'm gonna play this. I'm gonna trade it. And then Rescuer or Berserker is going to. Is it Rescuer? I keep saying Berserker.
Valiant Rescuer.
Yeah, Rescuer is gonna completely take over the board. Improbable Alliance is gonna completely take over the board. So you can't pressure this deck with creatures, which is weird for a deck that has no actual removal, other than I guess Gopher Blood. But
yeah, and you have all these Cycling cards, right? That you just get to cycle away in bad matchups, but then you get to sit there and make the decision of, no, do I want to cast a Startling Development in this matchup, which happens sometimes. Sometimes having this making a 4/4 to block with or save from removal spell is actually extremely relevant. Same with the Shredded Sails. we were just talking about the dragon. Here's a main deck answer to the dragon that also is playing into the goal of my deck and my game plan.
Yeah, it's interesting. I want to talk to you about, for what it's worth, the only version of this deck to win. This deck did win the Insight 5K. That was the only win for this deck for a tournament, and it's the Jeskai version. There are no black cards in this. Where do you sit on the type of cycling cards you play and stuff like that? This deck very clearly prioritized being able to cast its cards. Mm-hmm. As far as playing a Shredded Sails main, where do you? I mean, you played this deck more than I have recently, so talk to me about it.
Well, so yeah, I think part of it is we've moved on from these old Lures versions of the deck, right? And I think part of that is the Lures version is going to, when you have that graveyard removal, it's going to be going to be weak to that. When you have these exile wrath spells, it's going to be weak for that if you're trying to go with the creature clan. So Lurrus doesn't add a whole bunch to the deck, and you lose cards like Ironcrag Pyromancer. So now we have this version that's playing the Ironcrag Pyromancer, that's playing Improbable Alliance, and especially with a card like Improbable Alliance, where, I don't want to be messing with my mana. I want to be like the straight Jeskai version, because sometimes it's already hard enough to like get the colors you need for Improbable Alliance. I have noticed. You really have to be thinking about, which side of this land am I playing? What's going to be my most important spell to cast? Do I want to be casting a turn one Fox, or do I want to prioritize getting Improbable Alliance in play? So I think we're leaning out to a 3-color deck where you're not really gaining all that much.
You're gaining consistency, right? Like,
yeah.
I'm
saying you're not gaining all that much from having another color.
Oh yeah, I mean, there you get a black cycler that costs 1 mana, right?
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I just don't think you're ever casting that card more than, I don't know. I
agree. And all your cyclers right now are 1 mana, except for Shredded Sails and Valiant Rescuer.
Right, and honestly, like, I really like the main deck Shredded Sails. Like, I think that in this format is really, really powerful.
Spicy. Super spicy.
Yeah, and we kind of talked about how much I like the Teamer sideboard, but I actually really think that Jeskai sideboards also have, like, it's not the same, right? Like, it's a really lean sideboard where everything's super cheap, but the thing that I like so much about these decks is that Improbable Alliance fixes a lot of your mana flood issues. Like, it's able to kind of fix that problem that this deck was running into. When we talk about that original version that was kind of like the creature package, Improbable Alliance just lets you get rid of those things. So, but yeah, let's kind of wrap up with just the two of us. We're back to our faces, Mikaela, so people can see you. They couldn't see you for the last, however long.
I was busy looking pretty the whole time anyways.
I know. You were beautiful, and, really we should just make it your face in the deck list. I gotta ask, you got a tournament tomorrow in Standard. Let's say that you're playing for, I don't know, it's so weird, because, like, I would say $1 million, but then we're just going to trigger all the world's competitors. Where do you sit in Standard? It's funny to me that people don't like the Standard because they're bored with it, because everything I want in a Standard format, I feel like this format has. Like, it has aggro decks, it has mid-range decks, it has combo decks, it has control decks, it has ramp decks. Like, this is one of the best Standard formats of all time, and people are just sick of it because Edgevault Innkeeper exists.
Yeah, I'm probably going Prismari if I have to register a deck for tomorrow. Just against my whole game plan has been against like one opponent each week, with VML being my focus. But yeah, if I'm registering a deck tomorrow, it's probably going to be Prismari. If I want to climb the ladder, I'm honestly cycling has been a lot of fun to play.
Yeah, I'm excited to try a couple things. Cycling was not on my list of decks that I was playing in preparation for the podcast return. Like, I played 0 games of the cycling deck, and that, like, kind of looking at the list that we had on screen, it's one that really intrigues me, and one that, like, I'm considering playing Standard challenges, like, until rotation. I was like, well, this deck costs $100, so, use some of our sponsor money to play some Standard challenges. I think that, like, if I'm trying to hit Mythic, there are some specific decks that I'm willing to play. Naya, I think, is a slam dunk for trying to hit Mythic. I think you have game in every matchup. And I think the same thing is true of Teamer. So, like, I think you could almost swap those two decks. Like, I think both of those decks are completely able to just win any given matchup that you put in front of them. So if I'm trying to get Mythic, I'm playing one of those Edgewall and Keeper decks. I don't even know if it matters which version of the 3 you play. I would play Toski, though, if I'm playing Naya on ladder. I think that, listen, Logan Nettles is a better Magic player than I am. I'm sure that Mikaela will say the same about her, but I think that if you're going to lose the Sultai matchup if you don't have Toskies. Like you will just lose it.
I want to say the deck that you're going to register at a PT, or
or GP or whatever. Yeah.
At a Strixhaven Championship, it's going to be different than the deck you register for a 5K. It's going to be different than the deck you want to bring to ladder, because I'm sure Jabberwocky's like looking. We're playing against some of the best players in the world. What is going to optimize for that, and what's going to be the most consistent? Because the best players in the world aren't going to let you just get infinite value off a Toski.
Yeah, I'm not.
A ladder might do that.
I'm not trying to discredit Logan Nettles. He's obviously a better Magic player than me. I'm just saying if I'm playing on ladder, I have Toskis in my 75.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I was making the same point there.
Yeah. I completely agree. You did a better job than I did of explaining that. I think that if I'm not just worried about ladder and I'm just trying to play the best deck, I'm pretty close to the same space in Prismari. I think Prismari is probably the best deck in Standard. I almost though want to specifically play a green deck so that I can have Scavenging Ooze in this format. I think that if what we're seeing in this month compared to last month is true, then Rogues and Cycling are suddenly huge players in the metagame that literally last month I don't think either of them make the top 5. So how do I attack that? And how do I attack that while also being good against aggro decks and mid-range decks? And I think Scavenging Ooze for me is the answer. And so I don't really care what deck that is. It's probably not Sultai though, which is sad. I found a lot of reasons not to play Sultai in this format, even though you would think it would be one of my favorite decks. There's just always a reason not to. But that's kind of where my head's at in Standard. I think that Prismari's the best deck, and if I'm trying to ladder, that's kind of where I would go. Man, I'm lost. Where are we? Oh, we're wrapping up. Mikaela. First of all, before we do that, I had fun this week. I missed this a lot. I had so much fun. I think this is maybe our longest episode that we've done together, but I had fun the whole time.
Yeah.
And I really
had a lot to talk about. This was months.
Yeah.
Of Magic talk coming out.
It's true.
At once.
It's true. And also I really liked how you interjected a lot more this week. I really appreciated you going back, and I feel our communication got better. So I don't know. I really, really had fun this week. If you want to listen to other people talk about Magic, the CCMTG Network, ConstructedCriticism.com, we got Sam Black talking about Limited. Have you listened to that podcast, Mikaela? You can be honest.
I have not yet. It's definitely has to be on the list. So.
Oh my gosh. I feel so lucky to get a help in any way with that show, because he is producing content that is really helping people.
I love different takes on Limited other than the very straightforward strategies, and I've always seen Sam as a person who has provided that insight. It's really cool because I'll just go off for a minute. We'll just plug Sam Black for a second. The thing about this podcast that's so interesting, and the reason is he covers all of the archetypes for a format. He's like, okay, here are the archetypes for the format. We're going to talk about all of them. I'm going to draft all of them and be really honest about them. Whether he's telling you not to play Witherbloom, he's like, listen, Witherbloom is bad, but here's how to win with it. He's going to tell you the truth, but also say, here's how you can work around it. To being the first person to talk about 5-color snow. The actual first person. He changed the metagame when he released that episode, to the point where LR and what's the other one? Lords of
Limited both shouted out his episode. They're like, listen, here's Sam Black did this episode. If you want to know how to play a deck in Limited, just listen to his podcast. Constructor Criticism just did a pretty great podcast on New Modern. If you're looking for constructor advice, Constructor Criticism just did a whole episode on, here are the top 3 cards from the new set that are impacting Modern. Here's what the Modern metagame looks like. If you're a parent like me and Mikaela that doesn't have time to just grind, Homeward Path is on our network, and it's about just it's a dad driving home from work talking about Magic and like his experience playing. Common Knowledge is the #1 Pauper podcast there is. It's on our network. If you're trying to get better at Pauper, the network is full of great shows right now. Check it out, constructivecriticism.com. All of them are sponsored by puremtgo.com, and all but one of them, because I don't know, why did I kiss there? That's not the right thing. Boo Magic Arena that we don't have Pauper on Arena as a regular format yet. Can I just say, I would love to cover Arena Pauper on this podcast. Like, can we make that a competitive format? Like, come on, that format is getting sweet. And they'll do it like once every 3 months. It's so annoying. Just make it a format.
Historic Pauper.
Dude, yeah, straight up. Just give us historic. You would have so much fun, right? Like, can you imagine if we did like a historic pop-up episode every 2 months? You would love that, right?
Yeah. Wait, Brainstorm's not common on Arena, is it?
No, it's not. Oh. It's a rare, I think.
Dang. Look, I was already getting excited.
You're like, yes, Brainstorm. No, not in historic Pauper. Where to find us? Where to find the show? Oh man, I'm gonna get this wrong. It's been so long, Mikaela. Do you know our handle before I can find it?
No.
I actually bet it's on the screen for what it's worth, and it's faster for me. It is at Arena Mythicast. Okay. It is on the screen for the listeners. You can find me at Swizzle13H. You can find Mikaela at Mythic Mikaela. We do give out credit for MTGO traders every month in our Discord, and then Mikaela, your Discord. I always want to give you a chance to kind of talk about your Discord for your stream before we move on.
Yeah. If you go to my Twitter, you can find my Discord link. But anyone who wants to hop in there, I'm hosting a draft tournament this upcoming Friday, June 25th. And
when does registration end?
Thursday night, we're going to end registration.
So this will be up before registration ends, fam.
Yes, but anyone who's subbed to the channel is allowed to enter, and I have been doing some giveaways for entries as well. So
awesome.
You can hop on over there for those details.
If you're watching on YouTube, give us a like, give us a sub here on the Constructive Criticism YouTube channel. We're actually going to move back the other podcasts to the YouTube channel. We kind of tried moving everything away, but I think there's a lot of fun in having the entire network together. And then if you're listening on a podcast platform, you could donate $100 per month on Patreon, and it would still be worth less to us overall than leaving a 5-star review or two across the platform. The thing is that the best thing that you can do for the podcast is not spend money on Patreon, which, patreon.com/mythicast. It is straight up just leaving a review on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you're listening. It is so helpful. Don't forget to check out our sponsors. We've already mentioned Pure MTGO. Grey Viking Games is amazing. If you're an Arena player looking to increase your collection, looking for a specific swag, stuff like that. Thank you everybody for listening. Thank you, Mikaela, for your time today. It's Father's Day. I'm going to go celebrate because I am that thing that is a father. But yeah, I really had fun today, Mikaela.
Same.
We'll see you guys all next week with another episode of Arena Mythicast.